And so I'm really glad now to introduce a speaker that is not even in the list. That's my personal fault. He is so good that he did everything perfectly 6 months ago. So, and this is the destiny of people like Alex, because the other one coming last minute, could you please move my name and put my name 5 minutes earlier? Could you please? Everything is moving. And he was the one that was really perfect, and he disappeared from the list. I'm sorry for that, but he is on the website and everything. And the important thing is that he is with us right now here. He wrote a super interesting article a few weeks ago comparing all the headsets on the market, and you saw maybe him also there on the pod. Well, they are working in this specific field since always, yeah, more or less. And so I'm really glad to have him here. Alex Coulombe, thank you.
Thank you. I love you. It's great. I'm just going to keep this casual. I have like a more professional kind of demeanor prepared, but this is fun, so we'll keep it going. So my name's Alex Coulombe. I'm from New York City, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And before I talk, though, I want you guys to think back. Great, it's not working. It was working 5 seconds ago. Come on. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, I want you guys to think back to a very long time ago. Keely gave this fantastic presentation that I really appreciated because her discussion of phenomenology is a big part of what I'm going to be talking about today, and I was struggling with how to just give a brief introduction to it and how to phrase it, and now I was just able to delete a few slides and say, like, remember Keely's presentation, wasn't that elegant, wasn't that nice, and now just bear that in mind as we go through mine. And if you want to think of this as kind of an elemental thing, I'd call Keely's presentation like a water element or a water type, and I'm going to be this kind of crazy fire that's shooting off in all directions and destroying everything, so that's going to be fun. And Agile and Immersive Design is an extremely small operation based out of New York City. It grew out of the previous architecture firm I was working for, called Fisher Dax Associates, theater planning and design. So for a few years, I was designing exclusively theaters, which was a ton of fun because I also really like acting and the whole world of theater. And I worked for previous architects like Raphael Vignoli and a few other firms around New York City, and I liked it. But the reason I got really sucked into the world of VR was because it was so cutting edge and everything was changing, and it really went with my kind of manic brain well to constantly feel like I needed to stay on top of things. And so I really realized I took a strong interest in trying to keep up with everything and finding out the best ways to apply these new devices and techniques to help my architectural brethren who so often are feeling overwhelmed and like deadlines are approaching, and even if you tell them, hey, there's this one thing you could change in your workflow, they're like, please go away, I just want to go to sleep. So their time is very short. So if you're going to be explaining to them, here's a headset you should buy, here's a new technique you should have, here's an experience I'm going to build for you, it better be something that's really going to make their life better. And one thing we end up doing quite a bit is building charts that just help people understand what the technology is, where it's coming from. The article that Fabio mentioned had this chart kind of just giving a breakdown of the different headsets. So I try to stay very knowledgeable and on top of not only all these new devices and software and techniques, but the best way for them to be used for our industry. And I'm kind of in between the ArchViz and the architecture side because I'm kind of designing these phenomenological, VR experiences where they're very custom and we have to be very specific about what we're trying to show. And so I've been using VR since the Oculus Rift DK1. If you see the timestamp at the bottom, you actually can't. It's late 2013. And we went through, the DK1, the DK2, just very early stuff. We're trying to figure out how to lean and check sightlines in theaters. And that was very useful. And I learned some important lessons about, not showing too much too early. If the project is still in SD and you're making everything photoreal with tons of lighting and everything, it's going to overwhelm a lot of people, it's going to confuse them, it's going to make the discussion about the state of the design something it shouldn't be yet. And so we found that over the past few years, especially with the formation of Agile and Immersive Design, that we are building experiences and consulting at all different stages of the architectural design process, being intimately familiar with it ourselves. And so, every one of these bullet points here could be an hour-long talk, but we're not going to do that. So I kind of like to boil these things down into something fitting of where I am. And so, when I have 45 minutes to talk, I usually cover these kind of 3 general areas. And so we're going to cut one of those out and just focus on these 2. The quick review stuff would be drag and drop, one-click kind of VR platform solutions, the kind of stuff I'd be recommending to people when I don't want them to be hiring me, if I'm saying like, hey, actually there's a piece of software that does what you want very well, if all you want to do is walk around the building, inside VR, Iris VR, that kind of stuff. And so building a custom experience, again, I want you bearing in mind this kind of phenomenological idea of when you're inside a VR experience, there's an opportunity there to really understand a space, both what the current state of the space, as well as what the space can become. And it's different if you're designing a VR experience for a group of designers who are actually actively working on the space versus a client or a potential user of the space. Those all have different goals, and the VR experience built needs to accordingly reach those goals. And so I was at the Biennale the other day, and a lot of beautiful pieces, but I've spent so much time in VR now these days that I have trouble really appreciating, little scalies and these beautifully crafted, wonderful models now that don't let me get inside them. It feels a little bit detached now. Might be a beautiful sculptural object. Some of these you could see a design in the context of the city, and those certainly still have value, but the experiences that really got to me at the Biennale this year were the ones where you actually were at a human scale or something close to human scale, and they almost had like a playground quality where you could get inside them and actually just really feel like, there's something going on there that's nice. So a lot of these were doing things with mirrors that, for those of you who've been in spaces that use mirror as well, can help open up the space, make it feel brighter, make it feel larger. And I think about this kind of stuff when I'm building a VR experience. What should that experience be, and why? What are the goals that you're trying to accomplish? Because a lot of people, it reminds me a lot of what happened with Toy Story, when Toy Story came out, right? So everyone was like, oh, Toy Story was successful because it's a 3D movie. And, for those of you who have seen Toy Story, you're probably thinking, no, Toy Story had a great story. And if it was a 2D animated movie that was done exactly the same way, I still think it would be a classic film. But people took that lesson of like, oh, I see, we just need to make 3D movies now. And that's been really unfortunate because of the downturn of, more 2D animation. And that's a different talk. But I think the same thing has happened with VR, where people are like, oh, we just do VR, and then magically everything's amazing. And that isn't the case. There's a lot of cases where traditional mediums of representation are still the best ones, and VR should be handled carefully, especially because a bad VR experience can make someone not want to try VR again for a very long time. But when you are crafting a VR experience, I tend to show these slides to help people understand that it's not as intimidating of a process to start to get started with this kind of stuff as you might think. If you're already dealing with ArcViz, if you're already creating your own renders, if you're modeling and lighting and texturing things, then you might already know this, you're actually not too far away from being able to go from a flat panorama to something that's 360, or then, again, this goes back to kind of the one-click solutions, but there are very simple ways to get started with making tours. Peter very soon will be talking about the viewer, which is a great kind of drag and drop platform for that. And then, again, there's a lot of one-click solutions that will let you navigate a space. But those need to be carefully designed experiences, even if you're not going into the deep customization that I'm often doing, where everything needs to be, this is going to have this level of detail, this level of detail, and this will be off access, but this won't be, all of that. But again, once you have all that figured out, what I love about building a really highly custom VR experience is at that point you then have access to all these other platforms and traditional mediums. If you have a really nice VR model, you can make flat animations and beautiful renders, or at least use them as a starting point, because you're already going to have a better understanding of the space. So going back to more traditional means of representation, you're going to have a better sense of what works and what doesn't. And B, there, again, once you're at one level of VR, say very high-end desktop VR, you then can start to do things with web VR or turn it into something that's a little bit more akin to a traditional 2D video game experience. And that can be really fantastic. This is a slide I stole, and I like how the font is kind of running off there, from a great article by a guy named Vincent McCurley, Storyboarding in VR. And this very much goes in line with what Keely was talking about, where it's not about crafting a narrative in VR, it's about creating a space that allows for people to have their own narratives come to life. And so I like some of the diagrams here because it's just starting to walk you through the considerations that need to be made when you're inside a VR experience. And I was telling some people before we started, I really like the Mirage Solo camera here because it's 180. And some people say like, oh, well, that's a lot less immersive than 360, but this gives you more control over an experience that you're filming because you actually do still have a sense of framing. And if I'm in a 360 experience, especially one that isn't well guided, and this could be something filmed, or this could be something that's a digital VR experience, I often feel like I need to be spinning around, like, what if something really cool is happening right behind me? And that's generally a sign of poor, guided tourism or something like that. And so just to give you, I'm going to walk through very quickly just some of the projects I've worked on just so you get a sense of the breadth of what the goals have been and then why VR was useful. Because many times I've been approached with a project and said, I don't think that should be VR, and I'm either recommending a different company to do it, or I'll just say, like, I just think you want some V-Ray renders and maybe I can help you with that. So this was an example where a company already had a bunch of renders set up, and they basically just said, hey, we just want to get this into VR as quick as possible. And so that was kind of an interesting process. And this is right around the time Datasmith was coming out. And I was part of the beta, and it was a fantastic way to take all these V-Ray renders and very quickly get them into virtual reality with minimal effort. Here Felix was talking earlier about being able to do things like take a very high polygon count tree proxy, a V-Ray proxy from 3ds Max, and replace it. Those were the kind of things that were hanging me up here. It was like, oh, I can't be importing these 5 million polygon things in here. I need to do it myself. But anyway, the reason why this worked well in VR was because the goal of this experience, note that word goal, was to be able to pre-sell these units, these housing units, for students at UNC down in North Carolina. And of course, the fact that the students can go to the leasing office now and walk around those spaces and get a good sense of what those would be like when this building is constructed in another couple of years is a fantastic use case for VR. This is a project done for Intel, subcontracted under Glimpse Group, and this is a demo we have today. And Intel has their new i9 that I think is out now, and they basically wanted a way to show off the power of the i9. So it was like, what can we do inside Unreal Engine that's really going to be CPU intensive? So animations, particle effects, things of that nature. And I'll tell you, Intel told me to remove the fireworks, but here's the thing. This is going to be an open source project. Anyone is going to be able to download this soon and do whatever you want. So I figured, I can put the fireworks back in because when it is open source, that's what I'm going to do. Also, as we were talking about earlier with Anima, I don't like Anima people in VR. Same idea. They feel very uncanny valley. And so I also have a toggle in the experience you can check out in my booth where you can just turn them all into silhouettes. And I do find in VR it's better to be looking at a more abstract representation. Another cool thing we did with this project was made it so you could instantly create V-Ray renders from VR. So you can walk around the experience or teleport around and then just pick a spot and say, I wonder what a 360 render would be like from here. And it takes a few minutes depending on the power of your computer. Again, if you have an i9, a lot of cores moving very fast. But it's kind of a cool way to harness both the real-time capabilities of Unreal Engine while still being able to say, hey, I think once we get here, I want this to actually be a slightly nicer quality render or have higher levels of reflectivity until all the real-time ray tracing happens. This was a very early project for the late show Stephen Colbert. The reason this was a great thing to do in VR was because they had a very tight deadline. This is with a company called Bravo Media. And he had sold in theater, like David Letterman had just come out. And Stephen Colbert was trying to figure out how he could get this kind of effect up there. He wanted to paint the ceiling, and they told him no. So they thought maybe architectural projection could work. Excuse me. And so I created this Gear VR experience that let you very quickly move around the grid space and just aim the projectors with your head. This is before hand controllers or anything like that. So it was a very rough and dirty way to just get a sense of okay, what's it like from here? Let's change the focal length. And it allowed the designers who actually had to build this to figure out very quickly, we need 4 projectors, they need a throw distance of 73, and all that was figured out very fast compared to the typical workflow. This is a project for Seattle Rep over in Seattle, and this was about figuring out what kind of opacity they wanted on the screen. And so we did a full VR experience, we did a web VR experience with KR Pano up there, we did these 360 videos that can be viewed on YouTube, and these were all in the name of figuring out what it's like to actually be inside either the hallway or the theater and understand how much you're seeing into that room. Very important in a theater to know what might be distracting and what's helping to create the illusion of what's on stage. Now, of course, the best version of this is inside the actual VR experience, because then you can lean and see how all those little subtle movements change things. This is for FX Collaborative. This was about being able to show the Statue of Liberty Museum, which won't be built for another couple years, to both the client as well as people who might potentially want to actually see what that intervention looks like. And then we also start to talk about an area of VR which is wonderful, which is traveling for people who aren't going to be able to travel to a location in real life. So for anyone who might never get to visit the Statue of Liberty but still has some kind of emotional attachment to it, this is a free VR experience that they can actually just check out and get a sense of what that feels like, along with FX Collaborative's wonderful design there. This is with DSR and Rockwell Group. This is formerly called the Culture Shed, now just the Shed in the Hudson Yards in New York City. And again, very early experience, but I want you guys to see things don't always need to be photoreal or super refined. This was made very quickly because we were having a lot of trouble in the Revit model understanding what was going on in the grid space, and there was equipment that needed to go there. And the equipment all needed either 4 feet of clearance or 7 feet of clearance. So guess what we got? A 4-foot stick and 7-foot stick. Very quick experience to make, and it just allowed us to run around the grid up there and go, okay, it works there, check. Noted on the plan, we can put the thing we need there. So that's something that's just for the design team. You wouldn't show that to a client, you wouldn't show it to the public, but very useful. And now I just want to talk, and this is an experience I'm also showing today and tomorrow, and this is a theater that has been in VR since the very beginning in 2015. And you'll note that very early on, these were some very simple studies with no material, no lighting, nothing that didn't matter at that point was being shown. And so this was about spatial relationships. What's it just feel like to be in that space? Does it feel open? Does it feel claustrophobic? And then we also got to toggle between different scenes. And of course, a 2D screen doesn't do it justice, but being able to feel how the space expands and contracts, to be able to just check sightlines very quickly is a very powerful way to make design decisions. And then you'll see, as this went on, I think I skipped a slide. I did skip a slide, that's okay. Sorry guys, there's a whole middle section that shows like using the Vive tracker and all that, but it's fine. This has been in VR for a very long time, and we went through all these different levels of custom experiences for what could be done to help design that space. And now it got to the point where it's like, okay, well now we just need to get a sense of the materials. We set up all the V-Ray materials in 3ds Max, brought it into Unreal Engine. Now we have a simple VR experience we can walk around in. And then, again, right from within 3ds Max, this is using the new V-Ray for Unreal plugin, we're able to kind of output these different color options to decide what kind of palettes we think are going to look best when the thing is actually constructed. This is a nice segue into talking about VR sketching, which is something I'm very passionate about, as we'll see in a moment. And so this is a project that started with a sketch. And all these are panoramas. Again, sometimes you don't need an experience to walk around, and this one fixed point was enough for a while to understand what was going on. So we have our tilt row sketch, we have a very quick light study, one material option and a final material option, and then later on the client was like, hey, can we walk around and like change stuff and move furniture around? And I said, can we please do that on an Oculus or a Vive? And they said, no, and I said, fine, and here we are. So, to be able to do all that from a headset is pretty cool, regardless of the fact that it's not the ideal environment to be doing that in. Now we're talking about sketching, okay? A lot of people think that it's really hard to go from sketching in a sketchbook or trace paper over into VR, and it's really not. This is my 2-year-old, and he's a very good VR artist. Full disclosure, he didn't make that, but he totally could in like a month. He's that good now. And the thing is that if you're already familiar with drawing, it's not as intimidating as you think. I think sometimes about the suffering of architects over the years. Not too long ago, all architects were just drawing by hand. And CAD came along, you had to learn CAD and all the software that came along with that. And then BIM, which wasn't too long ago. And now a lot of people think like, oh, and on top of BIM, I need to learn how to design and draw in VR. And that's true to a certain extent, but the learning curve is not anywhere near what it was for these other disruptions, because when you're in VR and you're designing, whether it's drawing or modeling or picking materials or lighting, it's a lot more like the first one. It's intuitive. You're using your hands. There's not these complex keyboard shortcuts and menus and various software-specific workflows that might be changing every year. Much more intuitive. And so with that in mind, there's another wonderful thing about VR now, which is that all these experiences are becoming more social, where you can actually be actively doing something with someone in VR. So in a situation like this, you can have two people working through the very early ideas of design. One of them's in San Francisco, one of them's in New York, and just talking to each other as they're in the same space working this out. Again, a lot of times face-to-face is still ideal, but sometimes you can save the airfare and do all this inside virtual reality. So then I want you to think about these kinds of workflows. So for example, say you have a Revit model, say it's already gone through a certain level of design, but you are at a point where you would typically be doing trace paper or redlining and starting to change certain elements of it or developing it further. So one way, of course, to do that is with a sketchbook, classic, very wonderful way to work through a design idea. But then there's also this idea now that you could take that model and go inside virtual reality and start to move it around more, and then you have something that's both going to help you work through the design, all the while thinking about that human experience, the phenomenological side of it, as well as something that's going to be easier to communicate your design intent to anyone who needs to know, client, owner, other collaborators. And so here, this is just a very simple experience where I took this 3D Revit model, grabbed a section box, popped into Tilt Brush. One nice thing about Tilt Brush is it remembers every stroke you did and in the order you did it in. And so you can actually recreate everything very fast, which is kind of fun. Oh, a cool way to just show someone your recreation of an idea. And you'll notice this isn't meant to be precise. I'm not snapping to vertexes or anything like that. This is about a gesture, about an idea. Because then what you can do, once you're done with this and you've worked out a certain level of what that design wants to be, you can then take it into, for example, I skipped the slide again. Sorry guys, we're just hopping over a couple of steps in all this. But the middle part was taking it into Unreal Engine and modeling some things, doing light, doing materials. I don't know where these slides went. But then this is kind of the point of it all, is once you've worked out the design in a very creative and free-flowing way in a program like that, you can then take it back into something like 3ds Max or Revit and then make it more precise. If you actually know what the code requirements are and you want to make sure the doors aren't too wide or anything like that, you basically can have those sketches or 3D geometry that you made serving as placeholders as you make the more refined version. So I find that's a pretty cool workflow. And so again, just to recap, we missed this step, but being able to go from your modeling software into some kind of VR sketching or modeling software into a game engine if you want to take that extra step and be looking at realistic materials and lighting and moving that stuff around. Then back over to your modeling software and then rinse and repeat. When applicable, it's a really wonderful way to work. And so kind of the way I try to get people to think about this is, anytime you would be using a sketchbook or trace paper, think about drawing it or modeling it in VR, and it shouldn't be something time intensive. People say, well, it's ridiculous to design or model in VR because it's exhausting, or I can't be precise, and that's not the point. Like, first of all, you can sit down, you actually can sit down while designing in VR, and it's very comfortable and you won't get too tired that way, but also, I generally tell people, try to do everything you need to do within like 5 to 10 minutes. Like, again, don't worry about it too much at that point. You're just trying to work through an idea, you're just trying to get something to the next stage. And then here's a little chart. You're welcome to take a picture of it, or I'm happy to send it to you, or I'll give you this presentation, anything of that. But I do these kinds of things every so often. I can't promise that all this is super up to date. All this software is constantly changing. But when someone asks me, yeah, hey, is there a program that I can both draw and sculpt in that also has a multi-user component, then yeah, I say, okay, well, yeah, you can get Masterpiece. And as you see here, like, these aren't expensive programs. It's not like the Autodesk suite or anything like that. And the VR headsets are now at a point where $200 you can have something that will let you use this stuff. So it's not a huge investment. It's not a huge ask if you're in a position in your company where you need to say, hey, can we spend $200? So, proof of concept. This is a design that I came up with commuting to New York City along the Hudson River. There's a very beautiful spot that I like to look at, and I was imagining, what it would be like to have a little design intervention there. And so I hopped into Tilt Brush with that site still fresh in my mind and started to sketch out an idea. My goal with this was to spend as much time in VR as possible working through this idea and actually, by being in VR, being very aware of the human experience of it. So I was adjusting door widths and ceiling heights and the shapes of everything based on what felt right. All from within VR, which was a very cool way to work, and then was able to generate, different material options, different architectural choices. What if we move the fire to the center? Hearth is the same with the house, that kind of thing. And then from there, was able to have something that, again, you all can see this, and some of you already have, and it's been a lot of fun. And speaking again, by the way, about some of the the playfulness that can come with a phenomenological experience. That word is so fun to say. One thing I find really interesting watching people go in this experience is some people get really excited when something's interactive, like a plate of apples. But then if they drop something or knock something over, you learn a lot about someone. They might feel like they need to pick it up and put it just so back where it was. Or people just like to wreak havoc and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And then they just drop the headset and kick it and run away. And you learn a lot about what someone does in a space where there aren't really consequences. In VR, we can reset all this in a second and it's fine. But, I remember the guys who made Job Simulator talking about how a lot of people, when they're making a meal, they would open the fridge, take out their ingredients, and close the fridge because you don't want to waste all that electricity and, coldness. So I find that stuff utterly fascinating. And then just going back to my earlier point about how you get different experiences out. So this one experience, there's a purely sketch-related version. You can see a tilt brush. There's a daydream experience. There's a KR panel experience, as well as the viewer experience. And then, of course, the desktop experience. So once you've done the work of one version of that kind of thing, you can do a lot more. So now we go just wrapping up a little bit about the phenomenological stuff. Because a lot of times when people see the Cliffside Pavilion, the question is, oh, well, is that project going to be built? And I say, absolutely no way. And they say, well then, Alex, that was a waste of time. And I say, first of all, you're very mean. Please don't be my friend anymore. And then I say that, no, actually, there is a lot of value in something like that, because what I'm finding, especially over the past few years, is that people are spending more time in virtual reality. Iris VR had some stats lately that the average gamer spends something like 3 hours in a video game in VR, and the average AEC firm that's using VR spends like 6 hours a week in it, which is pretty nice. And so you imagine in the professional capacity, in the personal capacity, these technologies aren't going away. We're not quite at the Ready Player One level yet, and it might be some time, but there's clearly value in what can be done when you don't need to commute through heavy traffic or travel to the other side of the world to see someone. There's a lot of opportunities where that just makes sense. The problem with a lot of the VR experiences right now is, phenomenologically, they're atrocious to exist in. They are not pleasant experiences. And so something I'm constantly begging all of my friends to do, who are very talented architects and designers, is to start thinking about what the opportunities are inside VR to craft spaces that could only exist in VR and are doing that version of that typology perfectly in VR in a way that's very different from the real world. Because even the experiences that work really well in VR right now, in many cases, they're a simple emulation of the real world version. I don't know if anyone checked out the Oculus Venues stuff that's been going on the past couple days, but it's like being in a stadium with a bunch of random people. And this is a whole other discussion, but I wonder if you're going to have a giant crowd of people watching a virtual game or concert inside VR, should it really be exactly like what the real version of that experience is, complete with people talking too loud right over your ear, and that kind of stuff. Big screen VR, just a great example of screen sharing. Again, the way that work is starting to move to the point where you can have multiple people interacting, looking at each other's screen, changing things. Thinking about some of the architects of the past and the theoreticians who designed spaces that were never intended to be built. This is the Cenotaph for Newton by Boulez in 1728. And yeah, he wasn't thinking this was going to be a built project, but now in virtual reality, that can exist. And so some of these things that were meant to inspire and provoke a sense of wonder, they can exist and might lead to A, better real projects that are built, but also better virtual reality experiences that people are going to be spending a lot of time in. Ready Player One, I like the dance club that everyone gets to dance around in the air, and I think that's a nice use of the way physics aren't constrained in VR. And so, quick example of this is my thesis from architecture school up at Syracuse University. And we did a rough calculation towards the end of my thesis that this conversion of Fort Jay on Governor's Island into this crazy stadium full of cameras and some early use of augmented reality and all that would have been approximately $1.8 billion to construct. And so, of course, I wasn't thinking that was actually going to happen. It involved everyone getting in a submarine and traveling from South Ferry and coming up through the center, and then having this panopticon kind of view of all the stages around them. And yeah, no way that would exist in the real world, but hey, guess what? I can do this in VR right now, and I kind of am. I'm working with High Fidelity and Philip Rosedale's crew to craft a theatrical experience in VR that is starting to take advantage of some of these things that can be a really cool experience.